Abu Simbel. This name has captivated the imaginations of explorers and travelers for generations. Carved into the cliffs along the banks of the Nile over 3,000 years ago, the two sanctuaries are widely regarded as the eighth wonder of the world. The four colossal statues on the facade of the Grand Temple, which stand an impressive 62 feet tall, are the largest in all of Egypt.
There is nothing like it anywhere else. It is truly incredible.
The underground chambers, resembling sacred caves, extend nearly 165 feet deep into the rock. Magnificent bas-reliefs have been perfectly preserved there. In ancient times, thousands of Egyptians journeyed the 930-mile distance between the shores of the Mediterranean and the site of Abu Simbel, facing the challenges of the harsh desert and the unpredictable Nile. The priests, under the pharaoh's authority, meticulously chose the location for the construction of the two sanctuaries.
The temple was not located here by coincidence.
In order to enable the sun to work its magic twice a year. In the heat of the desert, hundreds of skilled workers sculpted the cliff face to honor the legacy of one of the most renowned pharaohs of ancient times, Ramses II.
I think he is the most egotistical of ancient Egyptian kings.
Although nearly perfectly preserved upon their rediscovery in the early 19th century, the two temples of Abu Simbel faced a near-certain fate of extinction. The construction of the Aswan Dam threatened to submerge them under the waters of the Nile.
If the two temples of Abu Simbel were destroyed, it would have been a huge loss for the shared history of humankind.
After exploring numerous outlandish options, contemporary engineers made the daring choice to slice and transport the two temples, block by block and stone by stone, in a mere 2 years, a remarkable feat.
People at the time would have said, but you can't. This is impossible.
The architects went as far as designing a gigantic man-made hill that sits on a one-of-a-kind concrete superstructure.
Actually, this place is not open for the public, so we need to get a permission.
Rescued from annihilation through cutting-edge technologies, the temples of Abu Simbel continued to attest to the grandeur of an empire at its zenith and the might of a pharaoh unrivaled in history. The rediscovery of these colossal structures at the far reaches of Egypt unveils a captivating tale of their extraordinary fate along the banks of the Nile. (1963). During the height of the Cold War, General Nasser, the new leader of Egypt, initiated the construction of a massive dam to control the flow of the Nile and supply water and electricity to the surrounding communities. The chosen location for the dam's construction is located 186 miles south of the city of Aswan and just 4.3 miles south of a prior dam that was constructed by the British in the early 20th century. Once operational, it will create a vast lake covering an area of 1,930 square miles and with a total capacity of 41.4 trillion gallons. This expansive body of water will extend all the way up to the Dal Cataract in Sudan, stretching for 310 miles with an average width of 6.2 miles. The construction of the dam will cause hundreds of villages and significant archaeological sites to be submerged under 200 feet of water. Among the treasures to be lost are the incomparable twin temples of Abu Simbel. Those seeking to preserve the temples are faced with a daunting task, relocating thousands of workers, engineers, and laborers to the middle of the desert, 930 miles from Cairo, for several years. However, the ancient Egyptians achieved a similar feat using only rudimentary means. But how did they construct such colossal structures in the middle of nowhere, and what drove them to do so? The Grand Temple's facade is adorned with 4 colossal statues that tower about 65 feet tall, making them the largest in all of Egypt. Each statue's face spans 6.5 feet in length and 3 in width. Atop each of the 4 heads sits the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, symbolizing the pharaoh's authority over a unified country. Alia Ismail is an engineer and Egyptologist. She graduated from the American University in Cairo.
It's really magical to be here. coming here, seeing the grand scale at which this temple was produced and how it fits within the environment, it's just very beautiful.
The same awe must have been felt by the first European explorers of the site over 200 years ago. When these explorers finally reached the temple facades after months of travel, they were completely covered in sand.
The kind of visual aspect of ancient Egypt is at its most potent and at its strongest when the scale is enormous and yet what you're looking at is very simple. And Abu Simbel is a very good example of that.
In 1813, the Swiss explorer Burckhardt could only see the heads of the colossal statues emerging from the sand. It was the Italian Giovanni Belzoni who 4 years later discovered that the 4 gigantic statues were seated, not standing, after spending a large sum of money to excavate the facade of the Grand Temple.
And yet there was a moment when the sand is cleared, the top of a doorway is revealed, and Belzoni and his team, with their lamps, get to look inside that space for the first time.
After weeks of insane efforts, Belzoni became the first person to enter the temple. Inside, he expected to find a treasure, and he was not wrong. In the darkness, 8 statues, each about 30 feet tall, loomed over him. They depicted a pharaoh with the features of Osiris, the god of agriculture and religion, who was benevolent and civilized. The space was so vast that Belzoni's torchlight could not illuminate this underground sanctuary of incredible proportions.
There are so many temples in ancient Egypt that are emispeos. But what makes it different to be here in the temple of Ramses II in Abu Simbel is the fact that most of the temple is carved within the mountain.
As he entered the structure carved into the heart of the hill, Belzoni discovered a vestibule leading to a small alcove. The dim light of his lamp illuminated the jewel of the sanctuary, 4 seated statues. The archaeologist probably suspected that he had reached the Holy of Holies. What he did not know, as Champollion had not yet deciphered the hieroglyphs, was the identity of the pharaoh for whom this wonder had been built. However, the name of this ruler is clearly carved in the stone of the Great Temple.
To this temple, we look at the walls and all you see are cartouches of Ramses II. You can see here his royal name, Osirmatra Setep Enra. And over there, you can see beloved of Amun, Ramses. And so Ramses II is everywhere. We know this place was made by him and for him.
So it is indeed Ramses II. Carved into the rock, the 4 colossi in his likeness gaze out onto the horizon. At the pharaoh's feet stand smaller statues. These are members of the royal family. While the pharaoh's wives and mother are almost at the height of his knee, his children only reach his ankle. As for us, mere mortals, we do not even reach the soles of his feet. But there is more.
We can see the god Ra in the niche at the center of the entrance. And here you see a combination of Ra with Horus. He's the Ra Horakhti. This is why Ramses II built this temple. This is what he dedicated the temple to. And just above, to mimic it, you can see the baboon frieze floating above the cavato cornice. And there you can see the baboons facing the sunrise, worshipping the sun god Ra with their hands up.
Ramses II ruled over a prosperous kingdom of Egypt for nearly 6 decades, from 1279 to 1213 BCE, more than 3,000 years ago. He is believed to have lived until the age of 90, left behind an impressive legacy. As a brilliant military leader and major builder, he is one of the most iconic figures in ancient Egyptian history. During his reign, Ramses II developed gold and diamond mining in Nubia, launched numerous military campaigns, and commissioned a plethora of architectural marvels, including the Temple of Abu Simbel, completed in 1255 BC after 20 years of construction.
He built some of the most impressive, the biggest, the most profoundly grand temples and other buildings that had ever been built in Egypt.
The construction work undertaken in this remote location is commensurate with the 4 towering stone giants that dominate it. Thanks to the surveys conducted at the beginning of the 19th century, we have been able to create a 3D model of the Grand Temple.
Can you believe it's more than 58 meters from the entrance all the way to the back?
It's really huge. 58 meters excavated within the heart of the mountain.
Yes, and not only that, they also had a width of 45 meters. So you can imagine how huge it is.
And how many rooms are there?
There are 14 chambers, and each of them is 3 meters by 12 meters.
What is absolutely exceptional at Abu Simbel is that the underground part, which is the hidden and sacred part, extends deep into the hill for about 165 feet. This feature is unique and cannot be found anywhere else.
How did the ancient Egyptians manage to create such remarkably proportioned monumental statues from a coarse and particularly fragile sandstone cliff? What tools did they have at their disposal? Despite extensive excavations, no manufacturing secrets have been uncovered at the Abu Simbel site itself, as the desert has seemingly swallowed up any evidence. However, objects discovered at other sites throughout Egypt provide clues. A room at the Cairo Museum is dedicated to the tools found during excavations, tools that are over 3,000 years old. Salima Ikram is a professor of Egyptology at the American University in Cairo and has been actively involved in numerous archaeological projects focused on ancient Egypt.
The ancient Egyptians had very simple tools, and yet they made amazing monuments, like Ramses II's temple at Abu Simbel, which was carved out of the living sandstone. And here, these tools were the very same that were used over 3,000 years ago. We have large pieces of hammers, and they're just big pieces of wood that are shaped, and they would have been used in conjunction with chisels and awls to get basic shapes down. There are also larger chisels that were also hammered in just in the same way. And then the smaller ones were used to sculpt the details of the face, of the clothes, of the jewels.
Despite copper being a relatively soft metal, thousands of tons of it must have been used to carve the Colossi of Abu Simbel.
If you wanted to get right angles for building the temple, we have the same things that people have been using for thousands of years. The plumb bob, the set square, and measuring tools, very simple. For the meters, they're pieces of rope with wood pegs at specific intervals so you could measure the cubit. So with these very simple tools, the ancient Egyptians managed to create the most magnificent of temples carved out of the living rock and then painted.
So it turns out that this massive facade was once painted. The team's graphic designer is now examining the details of the decoration that he had previously only seen in photos. By taking close-up shots of the rock, we aim to identify and replicate the color palette of the pigments that once adorned these giants.
You see some of the colors still remain.
Yeah, I see it.
You see a little bit of the red here,
Mm-hmm.
and some yellow in the kilt.
Yeah.
And over here, you can see some of the pigment in the arm. This place would have been like very vibrant, full of colors. It wasn't
Yeah, I
going to
think
look
so.
faded like that.
Inside the temples, some frescoes remain surprisingly colorful, even 3,000 years after they were created. Blue, red, yellow, green. All of these colors can be applied to our 3D model of the Grand Temple. 3,000 years ago, the facade of the temple would have looked like this. The paint was made of a mixture of water, a binder usually made of egg white or vegetable gum, and pigments. The red pigment was made from iron oxide, the blue from copper ore, azurite, the green from malachite, the black from soot, and the white from chalk. To excavate the Great Temple, the ancient Egyptians manually extracted 5,200 cubic yards of sandstone from the heart of the mountain, the equivalent of 75 semi-truck loads.
It's so evident the mastery of work that's happening here. You can see the ingenuity in engineering, the very precise and intricate details in every hieroglyph, and the massive scale. But when you see all this, you know it's ancient Egypt.
After preparing the cliff face, the craftsmen would stretch strings coated with pigment to create a grid that allowed them to draw the outlines of the statue while maintaining the proper proportions. The rough outline was then cleared by striking it with a harder stone. Afterward, the sculptors carried out 2 rounds of polishing using stone and abrasive paste. Finally, an artist would carve the details. After a final polishing, the statues could be painted using a mixture of water, egg yolk, and colored pigments. This paint was applied using palm ribs, a tough and demanding profession.
The artisans, the sculptors who created these monuments, especially Abu Simbel, this was something that was passed on from father to son. So you would start off very young with your father in the workshop. You would learn what stones can have what properties, what tools are good, how to make your tools, how to sharpen your tools, and then the technicalities, what to do to get the best effect. And probably the best work, the finest work for Ramses's Abu Simbel was carried out by the older master craftsmen who also did some of the more detailed work. And then a lot of the cruder cutting was done by people who were less well trained.
1964. The construction of the Great Aswan Dam had begun a year ago. The project was of immense pharaonic scale, and the working conditions for the laborers were hellish. Soon, the deaths would be counted by the dozens. The inhabitants of the villages in the upper Nile Valley were asked to leave the area. The waters of the lake would swallow everything, including sites of great importance, such as the temples of Abu Simbel.
For the first time in history, there will be a convergence of scientific, technical, and financial collaborations from multiple governments, partnering with Egypt and UNESCO to preserve this Egyptian heritage.
All eyes are now turning to Nubia and the sanctuaries located there. But the task ahead is immense. How can we possibly imagine moving a temple weighing 28,000 tons, almost 3 times the weight of the Eiffel Tower?
To think that it could have been lost is almost frightening.
The suggestions on the methods to be used to save this marvel of antiquity are pouring in. Experts and amateurs alike are competing with each other with their projects, and some of them are particularly ambitious, even a bit crazy. The proposal put forth by French architects Coin and Bellier suggests protecting the temples with a semi-elliptical dam made of sandstone, gravel, and silt, instead of moving them. The structure is roughly 1,500 meters long and 70 meters high, and it must be wide enough to not delay the morning sunlight and to preserve a body of water at the base of the monument, which the architects consider essential to the beauty of the site. The estimated cost for the project is between $59 and $82 million, with an annual maintenance cost of $370,000 to address issues such as infiltrating waters. The second project, reviewed by UNESCO in 1960, was presented by a group of Italian companies. The plan involves removing the top of the hill, then cutting around the monument before building a box out of reinforced concrete beams. The Grand Temple, weighing 253,000 tons, 5 times the weight of the Titanic, would be lifted by the synchronized action of 308 hydraulic jacks, each exerting a thrust of 500 tons. The temple and its caisson would be gradually lifted to a height of 203 feet. Once the final position is reached, the jacks will be removed and replaced with foundations composed of a series of reinforced concrete walls. The estimated cost of the project is between $43 and $58 million. The French archaeologists quickly sounded the alarm, arguing that the integrity of the monument must be preserved in its original atmosphere. This proved to be a difficult task. However, the British had a solution. Leave the temples where they are. The idea is to make the temples accessible after they have been submerged. The project has the advantage of being less expensive than those of the French and Italians, but it appears truly surreal. A concrete wall should separate the clear water surrounding the temples from the rest of the muddy waters of the Nile. Visitors could admire the temples from the top of the dam or from the restaurant overlooking the site. The most adventurous would take an underwater elevator, allowing them to observe the facade and stopping twice at the level of the heads and feet of the Colossi. Once they reach ground level, they would take a plexiglass gallery leading to larger domes, allowing them to comfortably visit the main halls of the sanctuaries. However, this project is impracticable. Water would inevitably seep into the rock's crevices, causing it to become weakened and eventually disintegrate. The release of internal tensions within the rock mass could lead to a real disaster. During the surveys, our graphic designer realized how fragile the sandstone was. In fact, the Grand Temple has already suffered some damage. However, it is unclear when it occurred.
It has been a mystery to many archaeologists over the years. Why are the other 3 statues intact while this one's completely destroyed? And you can see its head.
If one of the colossi has clearly collapsed, another statue bears marks of restoration, which is a clue for Aliyah.
This is an ancient restoration. This shows that this happened years ago.
What happened to the temple? Was it attacked? Did the sandstone crumble? The answer is not far away, specifically in the main hall between the 3rd and 4th pillars located to the south. Here, a bas-relief added after the construction shows Ramses II gripping by the hair 3 bearded prisoners he is about to execute, overlooking a text that had long remained mysterious. On the occasion of the marriage of Ramses II to a Hittite princess in the 35th year of his reign, the god Ptah Tatanen sends him a message. In this decree, Ptah refers to a natural event. I move to predict for you great and excellent wonders. If the sky has trembled, the earth rejoicing, and those who are in it jubilant, it is due to what has happened to you. The mountains, waters, and walls on the land, they undulate because of your perfect name. What God Ptah refers to as an earthquake. In 1273 BC, year 31 of Ramses II's reign, a sudden and violent earthquake sent a shockwave through the sandstone deserts of Lower Nubia. The tremors shook the foundations of Abu Simbel. The upper half of the southern Colossus crumbled into huge blocks that tumbled at its feet. Outside, the arm of the Colossus just north of the entrance broke off and rolled several feet below in the dust.
I'm a big fan of Ramses II. He truly has a remarkable ability to turn adversity into advantage. Despite the significant damage caused by the earthquake to one of the great colossi on the facade of Abu Simbel, Ramses II interpreted it as a message from the god Ptah indicating his favor.
The Great Temple of Abu Simbel is not just a mere place of worship, it is a tool of propaganda. It was strategically placed there to deliver a message to travelers descending the Nile River. The bas-reliefs of the Great Temple narrate the epic tale of a pharaoh who was elevated to the status of a super warrior. As he leads his armies northward, Ramses falls into an ambush by the Hittites, his enemies, near the Syrian city of Kadesh. Through the providential aid of his father, the god Amun, the disaster turns into victory. Alone on his war chariot, Pharaoh manages to hurl his enemies into the Orontes River.
Ramses II understood ahead of anyone that by controlling images and text, one can write history and even rewrite it.
On the southern wall, visitors can also admire bas-reliefs of rare beauty. Ramses, on his chariot, attacks a city whose panicked inhabitants drive their livestock to the heights for safety. The king kills his opponents, Libyans in this case, crushing one under his feet and finishing off the other with his war axe. The enemy is stopped dead in its tracks, just as a wave crashes against a rock. Ramses II ruled over a vast kingdom that extended from the Third Cataract to the Nile Delta and the more eastern lands of Canaan. He built his capital, Pi-Ramesses, in the easternmost part of the delta, at the crossroads of the routes leading to the Syro-Phoenician region and the Red Sea. The site of Abu Simbel is far, very far, over 900 miles away, to the gates of Nubia.
Nubia is the territory immediately to the south of the traditional frontier of Egypt. And it is a part of the world which is rich in resources which the Egyptians are interested in, particularly various different types of stone and gold.
Besides, it's believed that the word Nubia comes from the ancient Egyptian Nub Nebo, which actually means gold.
Abu Simbel was therefore designed to warn foreigners traveling down the Nile. The wrath of the pharaoh could be terrible, and Ramses II was not just a ruler, but a living god. The message is conveyed even within the naos, the heart of the sanctuary.
Here, Ramses chose to be represented with three key gods. He is next to the god Amun, the main god of the new kingdom, and he is flanked by Ra-Horakhti, the sun god of Heliopolis, and Ptah, the oldest god of Memphis.
This is a message for everybody in the empire and within the country that this is a powerful king, but he's not even just a man. He's not even just the sort of person who's in between men and gods. He is up there with the gods, alongside the very greatest of them all, including Amun-Ra.
The four sculptures towering over the sandstone were not haphazardly crafted. Their sculptors thought of everything. Some researchers had speculated that their gazes were fixed on a single point. To settle the matter, we placed lasers at the eye level of the two statues visible from the entrance. The gazes do converge towards the exact point from which visitors coming from outside begin to glimpse the naos' innermost part. They then enter the sanctuary under the crossed gazes of Ramses II and the god Amun.
So there's no question, I think, that part of the function of these temples is to be a sign, specifically for the people of the south, that Ramses II is the most powerful man in your world, and you better take care.
But we're not done with our discoveries yet. With its 130,000 cubic yards, the sanctuary dedicated to Nefertari, first wife of Ramses II and his favorite, holds many mysteries. It has never been modeled. Our drone will take a series of photos that will enable us to perform photogrammetric surveying and then reconstruct this impressive complex in 3D.
Ramses II created this beautiful temple for his wife Nefertari. right next to his magnificent wonder. And here you see him represented with her. There is a statue of Ramses and Nefertari and Ramses. She is flanked by him on both sides. He's surrounding her. And we can see this beautiful symmetry that is very typical of the balance in Egyptian art.
As soon as one enters the Temple of Nefertari, the magic begins. Pillars adorned with the sistrum of Hathor, walls with wonderful depictions of coronation rituals and scenes of offerings. The vestibule is decorated with reliefs in honor of femininity. The cow goddess Hathor, emerging from mysterious papyrus swamps, rubs shoulders with a large representation of Taweret, the hippopotamus goddess, protector of pregnant women. On another wall, a masterpiece of Ramessid art. Queen Nefertari herself crowned by the goddesses Isis and Hathor. Her representation also haunts the Holy of Holies, the Naos, as if she is emerging from the papyrus groves of a wondrous and astonishing place. Legend has it that not far from Abu Simbel, just south of the Egyptian-Sudanese border, among the dunes and at some distance from the Nile, a small lake surrounded by greenery miraculously emerged in the middle of the desert. This tiny oasis was the sacred site of the goddess Hathor, the Lady of Ibchek.
But, perhaps Nefertari's temple actually speaks to her own importance, not just as the king's wife, but to Egypt's politics, its military activities, its building activities. She may have been more influential than we really know at the moment.
The two temples of Abu Simbel appear to be inseparable, situated on two rocky outcrops jutting out slightly into the Nile. But one detail stands out. The orientation of the Great Temple catches our attention. Built facing the east, it is bathed in light at dawn. Both monuments also have a particular orientation, as their axes meet in the river.
The temple of Ramses II was not located here by coincidence. The temple is facing eastwards, as Ramses II, the son of the sun god, being here, his son facing eastwards and worshipping him, walking into his footsteps. Ancient Egyptians cared so much about astronomical orientation. So on the 21st of October and on the 21st of February, the sun goes all the way into the Naos, which is on the west side of the temple, and shines.
It is a staggering effect, and it cannot be coincidence, and it must be that the designers knew this was going to happen and knew that it would happen twice a year, provided the temple is absolutely precisely aligned. And they were able to achieve this, and able to achieve this sensational effect as a result.
For the ancient Egyptians, the night was the shroud of chaos. With the dawn and the first rays of the sun, the perfect order of the world was restored. During the reign of Ramses II, on February 21st and October 21st, the first rays of the sun penetrated into the sanctuary, illuminating the sacred boat on which the priests placed the sacred bark. The sun's rays then bathed the Holy of Holies in their light, illuminating 3 of the 4 seated statues of the Naos. The statue located on the far left, which belonged to Ptah, the god of death and darkness, had to remain in the shadow at all times.
And this, more than anything else perhaps, is a sign of what Ramses is trying to achieve here. The very most important part of the site, the very most sacred part, the innermost part of the temple, the shrine, you have in 3 dimensions an image of the king himself alongside the gods. So there is finally is the statement. He is not just a very powerful pharaoh, but he is himself actually a god.
Ramses II was indeed the king of self-promotion, a master advertiser.
Ramses II is perhaps the best-known pharaoh after Tutankhamun. He certainly wanted to be the best-known pharaoh ever because I think he is the most egotistical of ancient Egyptian kings.
However, the message that Ramses II wanted to last for eternity was on the verge of being erased forever, and it took a true feat to save it. In the early 1960s, all eyes were on the Upper Nile Valley and Abu Simbel, threatened by the rising waters. How could they be saved? Who would foot the bill for this project?
So UNESCO became really aware of this threat hanging over the heritage of human history. And then it played a crucial role by alerting governments around the world and soliciting absolutely fantastic help.
The United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, established in 1945, therefore gathered all efforts to engage in the preservation of the archaeological treasures of Nubia. The task was immense. Hundreds of archaeological sites had to be identified, documented, and tens of thousands of tons of stones had to be relocated. As unbelievable as it may seem, the challenge was met. To save Abu Simbel from the waters of the Nile, UNESCO had to relocate and accommodate thousands of workers and engineers for months in the midst of a desert. A challenge that had already been met by Ramses II.
Abu Simbel is located about 930 miles away from the capital, so it was a massive undertaking that took around 2 decades to set up, involving thousands of workers who contributed to the project. It's truly amazing, and as such, Ramses II was truly Ramses the Great, as he demonstrated at Abu Simbel in all of its grandeur.
3,000 years ago, the heat already reigned supreme over these lands, and the desert has swallowed up any clues. Who drew up the plans for Abu Simbel? Archaeologists have found no trace of this massive construction site. Where are the cemeteries, the campsites, and the machinery necessary for such a project? This is one of the mysteries of Abu Simbel.
This landscape, this desert hasn't changed much in the last 3,000 years.
This land has been dead all along. It has been sand and stone.
And there are no trees. How did they build the scaffoldings?
Well, the ancient Egyptians had the biggest highway in the world, and that is the River Nile.
If it weren't for the Nile, there wouldn't have been the Pharaoh civilizations, nor any pyramids, nor a sphinx, and there wouldn't have been Abu Simbel. There would have just been the desert.
3,000 years ago, the logistics required to undertake the construction of Abu Simbel relied on thousands of miles of trails crossing the desert expanses. However, these processions of men and donkeys needed to be fed and protected from the harsh climate. Boats had to navigate the cataracts that hindered navigation on the Nile. The vessels could be dismantled and reassembled once the rapids were passed. The navigators also had the option to slide the boats on logs along a path parallel to the course of the river. The feat of Abu Simbel lay precisely in the logistics set up thanks to the Nile.
One of the things that makes Egypt so great is that it has a fantastic administration, a system for recording things and for communicating. It has a system of writing in order that it can organize people and resources. And the Nile, in that sense, is fundamentally important.
As in antiquity, it was from the Nile that part of the material necessary for the engineers of the 20th century would come. But how to save a temple weighing an estimated 28,000 tons, 3 times the weight of the Eiffel Tower? The French may have an idea. At the beginning of 1965, between Aswan and Abu Simbel, they accomplished a real feat. The Temple of Amada, restored by Ramses II, was also threatened by the rising waters of the Nile. No matter, the French engineers moved the 800 tons of the building in its entirety by literally lifting it off the ground. To ensure the coherence of the megastructure of stone, the building, which was 9 meters wide, 10 meters long, and over 4 meters high, was wrapped and placed on 4 concrete beams. 3 transverse beams were also cast, and 3 railroad tracks were laid in the desert. 11 hydraulic jacks were installed under the supporting beams to lift the temple. In late 1964, the movement began. Inch by inch, the building crossed the desert at a pace of 46 feet per day. The convoy took 3 months to cover 1.6 miles. While its original location was already submerged, it arrived intact at its new location, 213 feet higher. However, it is difficult to imagine putting the 28,000 tons of the Great Temple of Abu Simbel on simple railroad tracks. The solution came from Italy, specifically from the marble quarries of Apua. In April 1963, Italian quarry workers were invited to Egypt and confirmed that they had the means and talent to cut the temples without damaging their integrity. On June 10, 1963, the Egyptian government definitively chose the option of dismantling the Abu Simbel temples. However, some experts announced that the operation would be a disaster and a costly one, amounting to $36 million. A great danger hung over the memory of the great Ramses II.
Early on in the campaign, when this was first suggested, we have to cut it up and move it. And I'm sure that people at the time would have said, but you can't. This is impossible.
On paper, the plan seemed simple enough. Both temples need to be moved 64 meters above their original location and positioned 180 meters further back. The teams had only 2 years to dismantle the temples and move them to a new location, all while contending with the unpredictable flooding of the Nile. The project involved several stages. In the first half of 1964, work began with the construction of a 37-meter-high and 370-meter-long cofferdam, a remarkable achievement in itself. This barrier required the use of 497,000 cubic yards of sand and rock debris, equivalent to over 21,000 semi-trucks. At its core was a protective steel sheet pile wall weighing a whopping 2,800 tons. Using bulldozers and jackhammers, and avoiding the use of explosives, workers removed over 150,000 tons of rock from above the temples before carefully disassembling the structures. Sand that had protected the temples for 3,000 years was repurposed by the 20th century engineers to protect the facade from falling debris during the relocation process. The interior of the sanctuaries can now be accessed through a tunnel formed by a corrugated steel pipe. At the heart of the hill, the ceilings and walls of the chambers are supported by steel scaffolding. Everything seems to be well planned. However, the whims of the Nile are not to be underestimated. In the summer of 1964, an exceptional flood exceeds the critical point. The water rises up to 6.5 feet above the top of the cofferdam. The floods risk engulfing the site and carrying everything away in their path. But the small dam and its drainage system hold up and withstand the challenge imposed by the river. Despite these setbacks, by August 1965, everything is ready. Interestingly, the modern engineer's cutting plan reproduces the method that the ancient Egyptians used to create these impressive facades: gridding. The statues, walls, and ceilings of the temples are cut into blocks approximately 31 inches thick, about 10 feet high, and up to 16 feet long. The blocks of walls and ceilings have a maximum weight of about 20 tons, while those of more compact parts like pillars or statues weigh up to 30 tons. But another constraint soon arises. The sandstone in the Abu Simbel region has a coarse grain, low resistance, and in some cases is very fissured. The blocks of this immense puzzle are very fragile. The problem was solved by drilling holes into the blocks as deep as possible and cementing steel anchor rods with artificial resin into them to lift them. They could then be moved by the large cranes that covered the construction site. Once lifted from their original location, they were gently placed on a bed of sand in a truck and transported to a storage area on the barren plateau overlooking the monuments. Finally, after almost a year of work, the last block was moved from the original site to the storage area. This is where the 807 blocks of the Grand Temple and the 235 blocks of the Small Temple were stored. It is also where they were repaired and consolidated before being returned to the site where they will be put back in place. The reconstruction of the monuments can now begin. The assembly process is carried out in stages. The facades with their colossal statues are supported by frames. The blocks are then carefully positioned and secured using reinforced concrete. The temple chambers are meticulously reconstituted and protected by reinforced concrete structures that provide both support and preservation.
And then reassembled with extreme care in a new location. This involved the creation of an artificial hillside. I'm not sure how many people who go to the site understand that it's an artificial hill that had to be created to house this new version of the temple.
Due to the risk of crushing the reconstructed structures, the massive rocks forming the artificial hill above the temples cannot be directly placed on them. To address this issue, the engineers developed plans for 2 reinforced concrete domes. These domes would completely cover the monuments and support the weight of the artificial hills to be created above and behind them. The dome erected above the Grand Temple is a unique technical achievement. It has a 60-meter opening, a height of 25 meters, and a width of 45 meters. The steel reinforcement alone weighs over 600 tons. The volume of reinforced concrete used for the large dome is a whopping 8,000 cubic meters, equivalent to 50 kilometers of roadway. It supports a load ranging from 20 tons per square meter at the top to 70 tons per square meter at the base, or about 100,000 tons in total in a single span.
Actually, this place is not open for the public, so we need to get a permission to get inside this place. If you look at the door for the first time, we'll find simple thing, but if you get inside, we'll find amazing thing. So we can go inside now.
No wonder this place, a kind of modern sanctuary, remains off limits to the public. The construction of this concrete cathedral required the use of special cement and cooling devices to neutralize the extremely high ambient temperatures of the region. It's an impressive accomplishment. A series of sharply angled reinforced concrete planes rise and fall in a remarkably controlled pattern. It is underneath these planes that the rooms of the Grand Temple rise, embedded in the concrete.
The temple is protected by 2 different systems that are located inside the concrete dome. The first system is used to measure any movement in the mountain, such as earthquakes or vibrations. This is done through a system of oil barrels that are connected by wires to a seismograph device. The device measures any movement in the mountain that may occur. The second system that's used to protect the temple is an air renewal system inside the temple. This is achieved through devices that have been installed in the concrete dome. These devices are air suction units that remove the air from inside the temple and replace it with fresh air. This helps to regulate the temperature inside the temple and prevent heat retention and prevent erosion of the carvings inside the temple.
Above our heads, the total volume of the artificial hills reaches 392,000 cubic yards, which is equivalent to the volume of concrete used to build the world's tallest tower, the Burj Khalifa building, which stands over 2,600 feet tall in Dubai. At Abu Simbel, modern engineers proved to be worthy successors to those of Ramses II.
And really, I think we have UNESCO to thank for the fact that now, having been moved, reconstructed and moved, that temple continues to live on, hopefully into eternity.
In March 1967, the last block was put in place during a triumphant ceremony. After 3,000 years of existence and 2 years of relentless work, the temples of Abu Simbel were saved from the waters of the Nile.
If the two temples of Abu Simbel were destroyed, it would have been a huge loss for the shared history of humankind.
Using data gathered by our drone, we were able to create a 3D model of the small temple of Nefertari, a little-known queen of whom history only mentions as the favorite wife of Ramses II, but whose life remains shrouded in mystery. This model accurately depicts what the temple looked like 3,000 years ago when it was built. And here is a complete model of the entire site, showcasing both temples in their vibrant colors.
And they are among the largest, the grandest, the most impressive monuments ever built by the Egyptians.
Two ancient megalithic structures of impressive beauty, whose splendor fascinated those who discovered them for the first time around a bend of the Nile.
There is nothing like it anywhere else. It is truly incredible.
Two monuments designed to glorify a pharaoh who saw himself as equal to the gods and aspired to eternal life.
Beyond the bounds of eternity, Ramses II still reigns over Nubia.
He's also a very, very great builder, arguably the greatest builder in Egyptian history.
Ramses II, the king of kings, a warrior, and a great builder who aimed for eternity.